Hello. So my project is called X Marks the Spot, How Reeves' Forgotten Excavation Unit Rewrites the Chronology of Head Smashed in Buffalo Jump. And so this is taken from my master's thesis, kind of the highlights of it. So for anyone who's unfamiliar or wandered in from Eastern Canada, Head Smashed In is in Southwest Alberta and is the oldest confirmed and longest used buffalo jump in the world. And so just to give you a brief overview of, again, for people who've wandered in from Eastern Canada, what a buffalo jump is and how it works. So up in red, you have the gathering basin, which would be a appealing area for bison to congregate. And Indigenous people from disparate but related groups would gather over a couple of weeks, spend some time gearing up and getting ready to perform the hunt. And then they would send out the buffalo runners, which are the guys dressed as wolves or baby bison, into the gathering basin to manipulate and trick the bison into the point where they stampede through a set of drive lanes manned by the rest of the community, and then over the cliff, and then spend a few days feasting and celebrating and processing extremely thoroughly all of the bison carcasses, which is done in the campsite area in the yellow down there. And the circles are much smaller than the site's massive. And then pack up and they'd head out. And Barney's excavations are the two white circles, the north and south. And then the ongoing excavations are in the purple circles, and then blue is just where the stream was. So for those of you who haven't been up on top of the cliff, this picture I took a few dozen meters back. So it's like the last less than a minute of the bison stampeding towards the cliff. And so try to figure out where the cliff is in that. There it is. So you can tell that the best bison jump in the world because you can just run towards it, and until you're like 1 meter away, you will not see anything. So Reeves did massive, like truly colossal excavations of the kill site in the 60s and 70s, and then came up with this diagram interpreting what he discovered. And that kind of masks how massive his excavations were, because the one on the tall one in the south area is like 6 excavation units plus a trench, and then the one on the north area is probably 5 excavation units in a trench, and these excavation units are like roughly 20 by 20 feet. Some are a little smaller, but that's the kind of scale we're working with here. And so based on some work Jack Brink did on Barney's remains that he recovered, there was a need to reinvestigate or to deepen our understanding of the gap, which is a hiatus of use of head smashed in that Barney dated to those dates. And so I wanted to get new radiocarbon dates for it and kind of see if I can kind of build on his work to understand why there was a hiatus of use of head smashed in there. And so I used Barney's original field notes and the boxes of the bones he recovered that had been accessioned at the ram. And I tried to reconstruct his actual excavation units based on his field notes. So I left out unit Y, and unfortunately, not all of his notes have made it to the RAM yet, so I was unable to clearly divide up the north excavations into their individual units and trenches. But this gives you a pretty good idea of what he actually found. So the projectile point types are all the different colors, and the red starbursts here are, if anyone's heard the dynamite story from Head Smashed In, those are the levels that he dynamited some small blocks of sandstone. And so the hiatus that he discovered is represented by those massive gray sterile layer in A and Z. And while I know on this diagram it also shows a hiatus in the north, in different of Barney's writings, there's kind of some uncertainty. He seems to kind of go back and forth on the understanding of the north area, level 9, because in some parts he correlates that with the sterile stuff, but there's also in the notes mentions of charcoal and paleosols and bone chips in it, so it's not really sterile. And then, so in other writings of him and his colleagues, they correlate that with Unit X, which seems to be an issue that he never got around to fully resolving, because as you can see from units levels 8 through 11, there's no sterile level. What is in that level is tons of butchered bone and no artifacts. So that piqued my interest. Now, for getting radiocarbon dates out of this, unfortunately, since not all of his bones have made it to the RAM yet, I was unable to get radiocarbon dates from directly above or below that big gray sterile layer. So kind of left that off to the side and instead focused on reinvestigating the Unit X, and especially the layers 8 through 11. Oh, and just one other quick note. The scale of his excavation is very important for how massive it is, because you can see like Hannah points only show up in one spot, and there's a very patchy distribution to projectile points throughout the site. So if he hadn't done such a massive excavation, we would have a much more incomplete understanding than we currently have. So that's Unit X. It did cave, that is the unit. If you heard stories about the unit caving in on him, that's the one before it caved in. And so this is the radiocarbon results that myself and then previously Jack Brink recovered from Barney's stuff that had smashed in. So again, just a side note with the oldest mummy cave stuff, there is this kind of continually the patchy distribution of stuff. All of the stuff in the north is older than 6,000 calibrated BP, and all the stuff in the south is younger than 6,000 calibrated BP for the mummy cave stuff, which is interesting. And then I got 2 dates out of the unknown mystery levels from 8 to 11, and that's just what the bone in that looks like. So clearly it's very heavily butchered. So to try to figure out what projectile point type in the sequence would end up there, to try to come up with a hypothesis for that, I went through all of Barney's writings and all the subsequent work that had been done on Head Smashed In to kind of come up with a complete list of all the projectile point types that have been identified there. So this list leaves out all of the weird unidentifiable point types, and also includes some projectile point types never before found in Alberta, or anywhere in Canada, but are found at Head Smashed In and are from much further south. And so this is just like a kind of a collection of what they look like, Barney's and the campsite ones from Jack and Bob and Sean and Kevin. And not quite to scale, but if you put them on a timeline, you end up with this. So on the bottom is all the points found in the campsite, and then the top is all the ones found in the kill site, which is almost exclusively just Reeves stuff. And you can see that in the campsite is where all the oldest points congregate, and this is interesting because in his writings, Reeves talks a lot about how he doesn't think he dug deep enough in the kill site. And clearly he was right about that, because there's all sorts of cool stuff coming out of the campsite. And the material you have to dig through in the campsite to find this stuff matches what Reeves describes as his endpoint in his kill site excavations. So it'd be nice if we continue that at some point. And also the date ranges for this are not Head Smashed In dates, they're just like general Alberta regional dates. And then on the kill site, you can see lots of different point types, and then you can see kind of where that little hiatus is for the projectile point chronology. So what I'm proposing is that the answer to what's in those mystery levels of Unit X is Oxbow points. Reeves does write about how he was a bit surprised not to find any Oxbow points at Head Smashed In, but then in the campsite excavations that happened subsequent to Reeves' excavations by Jack and Bob, they found 3 or 4 of them, which makes sense because if you look at Reeves' stuff, Middle Prehistoric levels tend to produce about 3 or 4 points from each type. So that tracks. And then one of Reeves' points was identified later as a Gowan point, and most of the literature coming out of Saskatchewan suggests that Gowan points were the direct predecessor to Oxbow points, and they are, and like, so to the point where like the makers of Gowan points are like the great-grandparents of the people who made Oxbow points. So it really makes sense that there'd be this kind of cultural continuity at Head Smashed In for people using such a fantastic site for a long period of time, and also both radiocarbon dates are good to go for Oxbow. So that's my small contribution to building on what Reeves did. And I'd like to just quickly thank my master supervisor, Sean Bubel, as well as the RAM staff, Karen Gearing, Bob Daw, Kyle Forsyth, and Christina Barron Ortiz. And that is a picture at the RAM of most, but not all, of Reeves and Jack and Bob's collection. Thanks for your time.